Good afternoon, everybody. So this is the, you know what, I always just look at the slides. I don't remember how to start the slideshow. There we go. Okay, so this is the Docker and Drupal talk. My name is Nick. I work for Enlightened Development. I'm a freelancer. I'm actually based in Worcester, so I campaigned hard to get this camp in Worcester this year. So I'm glad to say welcome to Worcester. You probably know me from the Talking Drupal podcast, which I helped co-host with Stephen and John, who came in a little bit earlier. And so welcome. So today the plan is I want to talk a little bit about Docker. There's been a fair explosion of Docker tools in the Drupal sphere over the last 6 months or so. So for people that are curious about what Docker is and want to learn another tool to hopefully make their lives easier, that's what this is. It's supposed to be fairly advanced. I'm going to jump into some code, but I also want to kind of just introduce the concept. If you have questions, raise your hand. Feel free to interrupt me. Let me know if something's not clear. It makes it a lot easier if people participate. So, first of all, let's talk about what Docker is and what the problem is. In general, the Docker problem that this problem that Docker is trying to solve is portability. And for us, what that means is if you've been working with Drupal for any period of time, you start to end up in a position where you have different sites, different clients, and different sites have different versions of PHP possibly. They have different MySQL versions, different dependencies. You might have one client that uses Jenkins to deploy. You might have another client that just uses FTP, or they use Pantheon or something. And in the past, I would generally, on my machine, I would have one version of PHP, and I would only change it if I really had to test something, or a site just completely didn't work on a different version. Like if I had a Drupal 6 site, I might have to switch back from PHP 7 just to get it to load. But if my version of PHP was a couple points off of the PHP version on the server, I really wouldn't worry about it too much, because it was just inconvenient to change it. Now there's tools for that. You can always just change what it's pointing at, or MAMP Pro makes it pretty easy. But that's a configuration step. That's something that you have to remember to do. And Docker makes that a lot easier. So one of the nice things about Docker is you can set up an environment specifically for whatever code set you're working on. So if you have a client that's on PHP 7, you can have a Docker container that has PHP 7. If you have a client that's on 5.6, whatever, you can have a Docker container that's on that. So when you spin up that site and that environment, you're always in the same exact environment as the server. So the goal with Docker is portability. So if I have an environment and I give you the images or the Docker files, you'll have the exact same environment as I do. Consistency. Vagrant is a similar tool, but Vagrant still, depending on what environment you're building Vagrant on, you can still get some inconsistencies. Docker tends to be much more consistent. And speed. One of the big differences between Vagrant and Docker, Vagrant it's a VM, and it has to have a whole OS. So when you spin up a Vagrant machine, Vagrant is running some sort of OS inside it, whether it's Windows or some Yosemite or some Linux distribution. Docker is a container, so it's much lighter weight. It uses the host OS, and then it just encapsulates whatever it needs inside of it. It's not running it's not running a whole OS in each environment. So it's significantly faster. So when you start looking at Docker, two things that you hear very often is a container and an image. And it confused me at first what the difference is, so I'd like to explain that a little bit here. An image is kind of a set starting point. It's, you get, imagine if you get a new computer, I'm a Linux guy, so I'll talk about Linux. You install Ubuntu, You like Vim, so you install Vim. You need PHP 5.6, so you install that, and you have a couple other tools you install. And then you take a snapshot. So when you turn it on, you always have a brand new installed Ubuntu, brand new installed Vim, and every other tool that you need, PHP 5.6 and whatever else. That's an image. When you take an image and you turn it on, it's always in the same starting point. And then you build from there. A container is an actual running instance. So I can take an image, say I created a Drupal image, I can take that and then I can log into that container, I can update some code, make some changes. That's an instance. If I shut that off and turn it back on, it can be reset. And you can have multiple versions of multiple sets of the same image running. So if you have 3 or 4 Drupal images and they're all one Drupal image and you have multiple containers running, they're separate environments and they're isolated from each other. And this link explains it in a little more detail. So for me, the starting point is generally the Dockerfile. With the Dockerfile is that set of instructions. So you say there's a starting point, so you generally say, I want to start from this image, so this known starting point. It's generally an Ubuntu image, or it could be, if you're working with Drupal, it could be a Drupal image, or if you're working with Jenkins, it could be a Jenkins image. So you're basically saying, here's an image that somebody created that has most of the steps that I want. Start there. And we'll look at a Dockerfile in a moment. And then you have a list of commands that you want to run. So you say, I want to start here, and then these are the configurations that I want to change. And then that gives you, when you turn it on, that gives you a container that has the customizations that you need. So let's take a quick look at Dockerfile. Where am I? So there's an Nginx container that I'm going to look at really quickly, and this is a very simple Dockerfile. So the left side.
You just make the windows small.
Yeah. There we go. And I think I'm missing the right side a little bit too. Oh no, it's just wrapping. Alright, there we go. So the first thing is it's saying from Nginx Alpine. So from is the starting point. Nginx Alpine is an image. So I'm saying I want you to start with the image Nginx with the tag Alpine. When you're saying from in a specific image, it's pulling from a website called Docker Hub. I don't know if it's .com or .org actually. So we'll find out. And Docker Hub has a list of all the different images that are publicly available. You can also have a private repo of images as well. But if you wanted more information about a particular container or image, you can look here. So you can see if we're including the Alpine version. If you wanted to, you could take a look at that specific one and see what they're doing to make sure that that's the starting point that you want. There's a maintainer line that says who to contact if something goes wrong, and then a set of commands. So all of the commands in the front that are capitalized, those are Dockerfile specific commands. There's really good documentation. Add and copy are similar. There's a slight difference between the two, and I always forget which is which. I always have to look it up. But basically what this is saying is I want to take this this file that's in the same directory that this Dockerfile is in. So if we look here, you'll notice we have the Dockerfile, we have the nginx.conf, and we have the sites. So I'm saying I want to take the configuration that I built and I want to put it in the Nginx configuration of the container that I'm building. And then we're copying some other configuration. Arguments are environment variables that you want to pass. So we'll see that being used a little bit later with Docker Compose, and then a couple of other things. So you can just run general Ubuntu commands, because if you look at the Nginx Alpine, it's actually based on Ubuntu. So you basically say, I want to create a user and I want to create a group for www data. So some general best practices, and then the command is what gets run when you turn the container on, and then expose is saying, hey, I want this container to listen on these ports. So when this container is running internally, it's listening to port 80, port 40, port 43. So that's a very simple Dockerfile. It's pretty straightforward, even if you've never heard of Docker before. You can look at this, you can see it's starting from an Nginx point. Somebody's maintaining it. They're adding some configuration that you can look at in the same folder. You don't have to worry about the argument for now. And then you're seeing that they're upgrading. They're adding bash, they're adding a www data group, they're adding a www data user, and they're getting rid of the default configuration and basically telling PHP to also listen on port 9000 for xdebug. And then you can ignore the command thing, and it's going to listen on port 80 or port 43. Pretty straightforward. So let's take a very, very quick look at a more complex one. So the utility container is the container that holds all of the Drupal nice stuff that you're used to, and one of the things that gets out of date that people don't usually pay attention to. So the utility container contains Drush, it contains Composer, and so that's another thing that gets out of date. I mean, when you're working between environments, how often do you make sure that your Composer is the same version? Or how often do you make sure that Drush is the same version between computers? You never do, and usually that doesn't cause a problem. But if you were like me 2 weeks ago trying to upgrade Drupal from 8.3.7 to 8.4, you probably had a huge problem because Drush was not updating for some reason. So having a different version in one place than another was causing problems.
Yeah, but that can cause interesting issues. We found that there was a difference between two Drush versions and how it compiled makefiles.
Yeah.
So one would take it from the bottom, one would take it from the top, and that yields very different results.
Exactly. And so the nice thing about Docker with this is if you update the Dockerfile and somebody then spins up the new container, it's automatically updated for everybody. And so you can make sure that you can pin versions. Even, one of the other issues that I've been running into was Python. My AWS CLI kept breaking because Python kept changing minor version updates for Python. So I finally get sick of it, and I created a Docker container that contained a known working Python version and a known working AWS CLI, set up some rules so it automatically pulls in my secret keys and values for AWS. And so whenever I need to connect to AWS projects, I just spin up that container, log in, and I can run it, and it works. It'll work forever now because it's an image. So,
Curious, is this utility container something that's kind of global for your Mac, or you put one of these like with each project?
We'll get to that. In this particular case, it's per project, but it's generalized for every project. But I'll answer that in more detail when we get to Docker Compose. So let's very quickly look.
Container versus utility container too? I mean,
No, so
interchangeably, or
that's a good question. The name utility container is just a convenient name I gave to it. So I gave each of the containers in this project a name for what they do. So I called one Nginx, I called one Solar, I called one PHP, and then this one has a bunch of utilities, so I called it utility container. So it has nothing to do with actually like Docker container. It's just the name of it, the pretty name.
so they merge when you put them spin up multiple, or
Well, they so in this case they spin up separately, but they're on the same network, the same Docker network, so they can communicate with each other. And you'll notice here there's SSH keys, so that gets spun into the other one, so that this container can automatically communicate with the other ones without needing logins or things. So let's take a very quick look at this Dockerfile. I don't want to get bogged down in this because it's complex, but a lot of the idea, so this is coming from a project called D4DD, which I'll get into more later, which was based on Laradoc. So you can see here we're starting from Laradoc, but let's just very quickly scroll through this. there's no page down. That's the other thing that annoys me with Mac. There's no page down buttons. So I have to go one by one.
It's like a useless function, I think.
Yeah, I could never figure it out. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. But you'll see, for example, it wants to know, there's an environment variable to determine whether or not we want to install SSH. If we do, then we run this stuff. We add the SSH key, like I said. You can see here we're adding Drush. So we're pulling the latest version of Drush, actually. But whatever version that you specify in that particular environment. So it's, again, you can see here, Drush version. So by default, it's 8.1.2. But you can pass it a value in the environment and say you want 9.0.0 or whatever, and it will automatically download that. You can see this is installing PHP unit. This is installing some user aliases, so it's easy to run commands. This one's installing Xdebug, and Xdebug can sometimes be tricky to install, so it does it out of the box. This is some testing and SonarQube stuff. So you can see that this container is much more complex, and you can kind of pick and choose how complex it needs to be. Like PHP, the container probably just has to be PHP. You don't need to customize it too much. But if you have specific PHP modules that need to be installed, you can customize that here. Okay, so that's a Dockerfile. I'm not going to go back into this because we're going to be looking at code for most of it. So the next thing is Docker Compose. So Docker is great. We've decided to use it. You get isolated environments. They're very quick. So you start looking at how to set them up. So the command looks ridiculous. So especially when you want to connect multiple environments. So I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's something like this. So let me just clear this. So a basic Docker command looks something like docker run -dit, and then you have to pass it which ports you want. So if you wanted port 80 to map to port 80, and then if you wanted port 443 to map to port 443, and then you have to say you want the image, engine X Alpine, and you want the name to be whatever. Like that's the command, and then you also have to add networks. And so if you're spinning up 8 or 9 containers, you basically have to tell every single container about every other one, or they can't talk to each other because they get set up on separate networks. So it becomes extremely unwieldy. And every time you need to make a change, you have to kill it and spin it up again, make sure you have the right flags and all that stuff. So that becomes unmaintainable very quickly.
Can you explain why you want separate containers for those things? Why the utilities are sitting by themselves and Nginx is sitting by itself?
Yeah, so
You wouldn't just create a container that has all the things in it that you need?
you can. So the question is, why would you have separate containers? You can have a single container for everything, but it makes it much harder to swap things out. So if you have it takes a lot more to build. So let's talk really quickly about how Docker builds a container. So when you have a Dockerfile, let's look at this again. So the first thing it does is it goes out to Docker Hub, if you have one. You can also say from scratch. So if you say from scratch, you're just saying, I'm starting from nothing. But you almost never do that. So the first thing it does, it goes to Docker Hub, downloads Laradoc, caches that image. Then it spins up that container, that image as a container, I believe, and runs this command. Then says that's a new image and caches it. And then it runs the next command, runs an image, caches it. And it does that for each step. There's ways to block them. I don't know the specific details, but it basically caches each command as an intermediary image. So then, say the next day you come in and you say, you know what, I don't like UTC. I want to change it to Eastern time. So it'll come in, it'll go through, it'll go, oh, I have a cached image. I have a cached image for this. I have a cached image for this. I have a cached image for this. Oh wait, this is different. I need to create a new image. So we'll create a new image, and then it has to go through every single thing after that because it's a new base. So if you have one giant container, if you make a change at the top, it needs to regenerate 50, 100, 200 images and cache them as intermediaries. But if you have them split into separate containers and you change just one little thing, it only has to rebuild the basis for that particular container. It's also a memory thing, so you can restrict memory
By container.
by container.
It's much more reusable between clients.
Yeah, it's also more reusable and it's more generic. And like, for example, if you don't need Solar, you can just leave that container out, or if it's just in one.
Okay.
So I think it's a best practice thing, but it's also, it becomes more convenient. You will beat your head, unless you use Docker Compose, if you're trying to connect multiple containers, you will regret it. Okay, so I've mentioned Docker Compose a couple times. What is it? Docker Compose is a program that was basically generated to help you communicate and set up networks and interconnected dependencies for Docker containers. So it's basically a YAML file that you create, and then you can list out which containers you want, and then environment variables for them. So if we look at, let's go in here, you'll see that there's a Docker compose-compose.yaml, and we'll look at this on a not in Vim in a moment. You'll see I'm still using version 2 in this particular project. Version 3 is out, slightly different syntax, but all in all, it's pretty similar. So the basic thing is, first we say what your services are. So this is basically one container. And so I'm saying I want to call this container applications. I want to build it based off Tiana and True, which is basically it's a good container for holding code and files. So this container, in this case, holds, the Drupal code that we'll see in a few moments. The next container is MariaDB, and so you can see there's a little bit more. So in this particular one, I don't want to use a base image. I want to use a base image that has some rules. So you can see I say, use the containers MariaDB, and it will look in there. It'll grab the Dockerfile, similar to the one we looked at in Nginx. It'll build that container. We can pass it some volumes, which is where it stores the actual database. You can, if you remember, in that Docker Frankenstein command, I had to map every port individually. This is where I can basically say I want to map this port to 3306. I can create a network so that the different containers can talk to each other. And then I forget what environment does, but it works.
It's environment variables.
No, that's arguments. Oh, you know what? Yeah, for this one, maybe it's both. Huh, I didn't realize that. I don't know why that one's environment and the other ones are. Oh, it must be at build time. I forget. I don't know. It worked, so I can look at that later if I know why. But the Nginx one, so if you remember, there were just a couple of things, but we can, in the Dockerfile, we exposed port 80 and port 443. With these, we can actually map our host machine's ports, whichever ones we want. We store some logs, and we basically say, let's look at one of the other ones. So if we look at, I want to look at the utility container one because it's got a couple interesting things. So you'll see on this it says volumes from applications. So it basically says use the same volume as the applications folder. So the applications folder is going to hold a Drupal code, but because it's using a similar volume on the utility container, when we're connected to the utility container, we can access the code there. And anything that changes there will change for the application, vice versa, and on the machine. So if you make some changes, log in the machine, run some tests, change some code, or run Composer install, those changes will show up on your native machine as well, and you can commit them. So that's that's Docker Compose in a brief nutshell. Now, before we dive in further into this demo, let's talk very briefly about the project I was talking about. So the examples I've been using so far are part of a project called D4DD. It's available on GitHub. I forked it on my business, but the root is at HID Global. HID Global is a client of mine that I've collaborated with or rather, I collaborated with them. This project was their genesis, and it aims to solve a similar problem as Doxel and Docker for Drupal. So we've been working on it for maybe about 8 months or a year, and it pulls in a lot of tools that a general Drupal developer will need. So if you end up using it, feel free to thank them. And now we have the demo. So there's 2 parts to my demo. I have some example Drupal code, just a very basic Drupal 8 site. It uses the Docker, okay, this is one of the things that will happen. You will end up writing things like Docker-composer and composer-drush and Docker-many other commands, and confusing yourself because they're too close. But it uses the Drupal Composer project to build it, and then I pulled in the examples module as a custom module so that I can show you some PHP unit tests using Docker. And then the D4DD project here. So we are going to attempt a demo right now, and it went slightly different every time I ran it. So I've got a version on here that's clean, so if it doesn't go well, you can just switch to that. But I wanted to show you how you can pull down a project, spin up this environment around it, and get going nice and quick. So to your, I think it was your question, or might have been your question. There was a question about whether or not this is per site or kind of globally on your computer. People have different views on that. This particular project kind of pulls from the ethos of the ladder doc. So the idea is you would clone D4DD inside each project that you run, and then you change the environment variables. So the idea is, if it's a global thing, you basically you can only have one set of environments running at a time, because you're mapping ports to port 80. So you can't have the same thing listed on the same port. But with this environment variable, you can basically say, hey, this site is listing on 8000, this site is listing on 8001, this site is listing on 8002, and whatever. And so you can have every client set up, you can have them running at the same time, and you can do things like have them communicate with each other, and you can context switch much faster as well. So the idea is
Is that how you would set them up for redundancy, like through a load balancer? Like if you had like 3 instances of the same site?
That's a whole nother talk.
Okay.
But because then you have to start dealing with service discovery. I did a project, I can talk to you after about that. That is way more complicated. But it's interesting. But that is one of the uses of Docker. The idea is that you have, because the containers can spin up so quickly, if you get an overloaded service, you can kill it and spin it up before the next request comes in. Actually, if you get interested in Docker, there is a Docker conference, and one of the keynotes a couple years ago was showing how you can receive an HTTP request, spin up a Docker, realize it's coming in, spin up a Docker container, handle the request, send out the response, and kill it in the amount of time it takes for the HTTP request to come in. You don't see lag because you have to spin something up. That's how fast you can do it. So it's pretty cool stuff, but it's beyond the scope.
So are your containers, are they in swarms?
Again, that's a little bit outside. In this particular case, no. It's similar, like Docker Compose, I think, kind of solves a similar problem. Everything is local here. I think Swarm is for scaling and having it remote. This is only for development locally.
You can make a local swarm.
Yeah, I haven't played with it too much, to be honest. So
yeah, it's kind of new.
Yeah, I really haven't.
Questions about it too, but there's a free tutorial you can on the Docker website, and you can use the Docker Compose file and tell it how many instances you want of each of your containers.
Okay. So let's move on with the demo. So the idea here is I'm going to clone my project from GitHub. I'll move in. I will clone the D4DD project in there. I've already got the git ignore set up, so it doesn't do it. I'll run composer install once. I don't have to, I'm going to do here for convenience because it's a little bit faster to run it out here than in the container, but you can run it in the container. But just for the, and it's faster on Ubuntu. It's a little bit slower on my laptop. I don't know if that's because it's a Mac, but I'm going to say that it is.
Unfortunately.
So the first thing is I clone it. So I move, that was very quick. And then I'm going to clone D for DD. And I just need to find it. Yep. And then I'll just open it here. So it's a little bit easier to see. Okay. So you can see we have the general Drupal compose structure here. We've got D for DD right here. I am going to show I swear I do everything with the keyboard normally. I can never remember keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to run composer install, and I'll run through that pretty quickly. While that's happening, let's take a look at some commands to know. So there's 4 or 5 commands that you really want to know with Drupal compose. The first one is build. So you have to run build before you do anything. That's the thing that steps through, grabs the image, steps through, builds a new image, caches it, steps through, builds a new image, caches it. So that builds the environment. The second thing is up-D, up-D. That's what basically turns everything on. So that goes to the Drupal compose file and says, okay, we need to turn this one on and connect it here, turn this one on, connect it here. You need the -D, otherwise that makes it go in the background. Otherwise you will get more data in your terminal than you've ever seen in your life. And if you close that terminal, it will die. So you want to run it in the background. The next command, if you're using Docker generally, if you want to log in, you use attach, but with this you use execute, the container name. So you were asking about the utility -container name. That's just an easy name to remember, so you can connect to it, and then what command you want to, or what shell you want to use. You can kill containers without deleting the volumes. So if you want to just reboot or update something, you can do that. And a lot of times, if the volume is outside of the Docker root, like for example a database, it will keep that data for you. So if you log back in, you will get the same database. If you want to wipe everything clean and start from scratch, -V will delete the volumes as well. And then Docker PS will give you a list of the containers that are currently running. But the D4D project actually has some nice tools there. So so composer install ran. So I am going to excuse me. I'm going to go in here just so it's a bit easier to see. I'm going to run the first command. Does anybody remember what that was? Docker compose build. And that's not going to work because I forgot something. I knew I was going to forget something. Should have brought out my handy dandy cheat sheet. So you heard me mention a couple of times there's environment variables. Those are kept in a file called .env. For this project we provide a default that you just need to copy. And then you need to just change some values. So in this particular project, so I put D4DD inside the project and I just said, hey, remember I said the application container contains all the code? I said, hey, just grab one level above you. If you absolutely do not want to have D4DD in the project because you don't want to put it in the git ignore or something, you could technically put this outside and then just point this at the container code. And then obviously the doc root, where the theme is, which host, and then for all these ports, you're saying which host port is going to point at which internal port for that particular container. So we don't want 80, we want 80, 809, and I'm just going to make some up so I don't override. So 3056, and the rest of these should be fine. So So this is basically saying that these are all invalid because there were no values for that. So let's try that again. And so if you take a quick look, you'll see it's running step 8 of 12, runs that command. It realizes that it has a cached copy of that, so it uses it. It runs the next command, 9 of 12, uses cache. So if I were to go into that particular container's Dockerfile and make a change, when it hit there, it would go, oh, something changed. It would run the command, and you would see it, if it was like apt-get update, you would see it scrolling the actual terminal response. So it's pretty straightforward. So the next command, but if we run docker ps, you'll see that nothing is running. They're just built, ready to go. So we're going to spin it up. See, I told you. I do that so much. And I get frustrated with myself, even when I'm by myself in my office. I told myself there were 2 things I didn't want to forget. I didn't want to accidentally do that, and I didn't want to forget to copy the environment. And I did both of them, but hey. And so this takes a couple minutes, but you can see it's creating a bunch of different containers. I think if we scroll up, you'll see it also created a bunch of networks. It created a couple of volumes. So you can see up here, it created a default and a SonarNet network. It created a bunch of volumes, which is where it stores data. And then it created the containers, and they're running. So if we look at Docker PS again, you'll see that they're all up. Again, this isn't very pretty. So this project actually has a status script that will show you they're all running except for Grunt. We used to use Grunt quite a bit on the project. And we don't really use it anymore. So when it broke, we kind of just ignored it. So if somebody needs Grunt, they can feel free to fix it and do a pull request. But we can see that everything is running. And so there's a couple things we can do from here. So the first thing is, if you remember, we mapped Nginx to port 8009. So if we go to localhost and go to 8009, it's mapped to port 80 on Nginx, which is pointing at the web root on applications. And so it'll take a second, but it will give us an install page. If we want to log into a container and do some stuff, we can use the exec command. And we can just say which container we want to connect to, utility container. And we can say which shell we want. And so now we're logged in. Oh, I need to be in. Oh, what if I use the consistent? I wasn't in the D4DD folder there. That's why that didn't work. Utility container. And so now we're logged in as root on the utility container, and so we should have Drush here, and we should have Composer. And we have a bunch of other stuff. I don't remember everything that's involved there, but we also have a convenient command to run PHP coverage tests and a couple other things. And so we're logged in. And if we were to go, I set it to put everything in var www Drupal. If we go in here and create a file .txt, and then we go here, you'll see that it's created right here. So they're bidirectional. So if I were to, although this is probably owned by root because they just created it as root, it's bidirectional. So if I delete that, it will delete it in the application for Docker as well. So let's take a look here. And then we can install. And we'll do the first giveaway with this. So we're gonna, one of the nice things with Drupal 8 that makes this a lot more convenient is as long as you have root credentials, it will create a database for you. So we'll just make up a database name. The credentials for root for the D4DD project is root and secret. And so here's the question for the first giveaway. And if you don't know, it's fine. The host needs to be changed to MariaDB, because one of the nice things about Docker Composer is if they're on the same network, their host files point at each other based on the name of the container. So right now we're essentially looking at the Nginx container, and it knows the MariaDB container by its name, MariaDB. So we need to point at MariaDB as the host from Nginx. And so it will be routed automatically to the MariaDB container. So here's the question. Do we need to change the port, remembering that we changed it here? Does anybody know?
No.
Very good. So if we wanted to connect to MariaDB from our local machine, we would need to use this port. But internally, they're on the same network, as long as you define them to be on the same network. So it will contact MariaDB with port 3306 as long as it's open. So we have to change the host, but we don't need to change the port. Because when we look at the Docker Compose, and we look at the MariaDB, we mapped it to 3306. So we leave that the same, and we can install it, and we're good to go. And it's going to take a moment. And just to give you an idea of speed, I mean, this goes when you're on native Linux, it goes as fast or faster as having something native. So trying to install Drupal when you're installing it on your local MySQL and local PHP, it goes just as fast as using the Docker container, which is not the case for Vagrant. Vagrant is always much slower. So this will take a moment. While that's running, let's take a look at some of the other stuff. So we have Jenkins on port, not that port, port 8080. And the passwords here are the passwords tend to be admin for everything except for MariaDB, where it's root and secret, and that's documented. So one of the nice things here is it comes pre-configured with, this is actually one of the coolest things in this whole project. So it comes pre-configured with a job that will run Composer install, so if you updated something, and then it will run PHP coverage tests and a couple other things, and then it will send that information to SonarQube. SonarQube is a tool that will do things like tell you how much code debt you have, tell you how many things passed, how many things failed. And one of the coolest things in this setup is they need like a specialized token to communicate. And if you look at the Jenkins container, it will spin up the SonarQube container, generate that token, and then replace it in this project so that it can connect automatically. And it just runs a couple commands. So you can see right here, it SSHs into the utility container. Again, they talk to each other by their name. It changes directory to the Drupal directory, runs Composer install, runs updates. I forget why it does that, but I had to do that. Because the aliases for the coverage tests, you need to make sure that they're available. And then it runs some coverage tests. So we just need to wait for this to finish installing, and then we can run it. And I'll take questions while it runs because it takes about 5-10 minutes in this setup.
So you have several containers running. One of them is like the file share. So
Yes.
how did that get into and available in the utility container?
Yeah.
Did you have to map it to each?
No,
container?
yes and no. So, so the question is, how do we get the code shared between everything? So we created this applications container right here, which creates a volume. So it basically maps the application folder to var www/Drupal. And then the containers that we want to be able to affect that code base, if we look at utility container, we have this right here where it says volumes from. So we're basically saying take whatever volume that has and duplicate it yourself. And so if we had written this instead, it would basically make a duplicate volume for itself, and they wouldn't see each other, or you would get some really weird behavior. But because you're saying volumes from, it's basically saying everything that this has, you're copying. And so this basically serves as a very clean way to be able to copy the code into separate containers when you spin them up.
So why doesn't Nginx have volumes from applications?
The short answer is it doesn't need it. The long answer is I'm not exactly sure why it doesn't need it.
Well, I think because you have volumes from PHP FDM.
I think that, yeah,
FDM has volumes from.
that's why.
So it just kind of keeps cascading.
Yeah, that's why.
It needs to know it's PHP files, but in
Oh, yeah,
Nginx, it's just
that's
asking
nice.
PHP for files.
No, that's the reason why, because it's
That's why.
cascading. Yep.
Because it's FDM.
Okay, so let's see if this is installed. One thing to mention, one slightly tricky thing. You'll see here, there's a link to SonarQube, and normally you would click on that and go there. But because this is internal to the containers, it's thinking that the SonarQube is at SonarQube as a host, but your host doesn't actually have that. So if you were to click on this, actually it's not doing, there's another link somewhere. You'll click on it and it'll bring you to SonarQube:9000, and it won't work because your host doesn't have that mapped. So you have to actually go, if you want to go to SonarQube, really, you need to go to localhost and then whatever port you mapped, which I think we did 9000. And here's another nice thing. Port 9000 is usually taken up by Xdebug, but because Xdebug is run in a different container and only internally, it's not external, it doesn't matter that you're mapping something to 9000, they won't break. So that's just a nice little thing. So we can log in here. And we're logged into SonarQube, and I'll let's see if this is finished. Site name. Okay, so once this is done, I will kick off this job, and then I'll take questions. Oh no, I will give away the other two shirts, take questions, and then hopefully we'll finish before this is over. So we now have a Drupal site from a basic build running in containers. Jenkins is running in a container and connected to everything. SonarQube's running in a container and connected to everything. So I'm going to build this. And we'll watch this. Who answered the first question? I don't remember. Okay. So the last two will be trivia. I only have 2 trivia questions, so I hope you guys answer them, because then I'm going to gloss. Who knows the day? What's the date that Drupal came out in general? I was trying to come up with something that was kind of straightforward, but not. Nobody. Huh. So, year's fine if nobody knows the date without Googling. No? Okay, I guess I'll keep it. January 15th, 2000. So it's been 18 years almost. How about Drupal 8? Do people remember that? When Drupal 8 came out?
October.
Close.
2016.
November 1st?
17,
It's around Halloween.
No. Okay, these are awful questions. No, November 19th, 2015. So, does anybody have a trivia question? Does anybody want a t-shirt?
When's Nick's birthday?
Oh, that's not fair.
He doesn't age, he's eternal.
Oh, there you go.
I said it's not fair because my wife's over there. I think she knows my birthday. Nobody. Now I'm hurt.
So, just thinking about how this would work in a production environment.
Yeah, so the idea is you're not using Docker in the production. You can, but the idea here is you're using it as development. You can use it as deployment and testing. So you can set up so that Jenkins will spin up a Docker container to run all the tests and build. So you're starting from a clean known environment every time, and you can make the easiest way is generally you make the Docker container match the production environment. Or, I mean, you can always make the server match the Docker environment as well, but it's easier the other way.
So this is almost kind of like what Provo does, or something like that. You could have Jenkins spin up a container on every branch. Or
Yeah.
branch,
Yep.
push or something like that.
Yeah, that's one of the ways that you can do it, and it makes it very easy to context switch. The idea here is that you're doing it to no tests executed. What happened? Okay, so I probably need to configure. Oh, I know what I did. So, oh no, it's enabled. Huh. Well, it did run. It's right here. I'm looking at it. That's weird. I don't know why I didn't run the. Maybe I didn't commit them. That could be it. No, it's there. Huh. Interesting. I'll try running it one more time. I don't know. I don't want to debug that in front of you guys. Any other questions? Okay, who wants to? I have 2 T-shirts. Who wants them?
I have a question. Have you heard of Algorithm, which is another one using Docker?
Which one?
Lagoon.
No.
So a competitor to Doxel kind of thing for other ways to, okay.
And so
It used to be Calabox.
no, that's Lando.
All these in LA.
Yeah, Laradoc, Lando, Calabox. Yeah. So this is where it is. So if you want the site that I built, as an example, it's right here. It's called the NetCamp 2017 demo. I mean, it uses the Drupal Compose project. I add a bunch of things to get ignore. I add a couple configuration things, installing that module. I update the PHP unit version because this doesn't work with the default PHP unit version, and a couple other things. I wonder if that didn't. I've been having composer issues recently, so I wonder if that's why it didn't run. But it's pretty straightforward. I'll double check after, and then the D for DD is here as well, but you can also get it directly from the source.
Can you compare and contrast Docker to Drupal?
They're very similar. One of the big differences is they've integrated some nicer networking stuff. So with this project you use localhost, and I think that they do some funky DNS stuff to make it so you can actually visit a domain. I mean, you could do that here too. You could basically set up a virtual host and set up your host file to point at it. I just really don't have a problem going to localhost.
Is there any sort of dashboard or is there just...
No dashboard. I mean, it's just raw Docker.
So how do you keep track of like if you have a dozen sites that you're working on all at the same time? At the same time,
It's by the So there's 2 parts to that question. So the first thing is, how do you keep track of which one you're in? It's by the folder. So that's why you install it in the folder of the project you're working on. So you just see like, oh, I'm in project X subfolders. That means I'm connecting to whatever. And then obviously if you visit the port, you'll see different sites. I think if you spin up a second one, so it's I can verify this. I think if you connect to a second one, it will do like underscore, so like utility container _1. I think maybe one of the nice things is we can set up so it's easier to name them. But let me take a look. So if we go to test demo, So these are on different ports, so it should be fine. I don't know what happens. Actually, Jenkins are on the same port, so I don't know if it takes it over or not, but it shouldn't. Oh yeah, you can see it appended everything with _1. So there, once this is done, I will run Docker PS and we can see everything.
Do you see a significant difference when you spin things up in the Mac than in the Linux?
It's much slower on Mac. Much more slower. Like doing this on Linux, like when I first built it, remember everything was cached. That's because I pre-built it. So if I delete every container and image on my Linux machine and I run build, the limiting factor is downloading the images, which can be somewhat big, and it will take maybe 15 seconds to build the whole thing. Doing it on the Mac took almost 5 minutes. But that's generally just the first time is the longest, and then each other time it really depends on where you're making a change. If you're making a change at the end of the chain, like in one of the last things to get built, it'll take 5 seconds to build. If you change something in like the application one, which is built first and at the top, it will take a lot longer because that's to rebuild everything underneath it. But it still has certain things that are cached. Like it will say, oh, you need the Nginx image, but you already have it. So we're getting close to time. But so if we do, you'll see we have like PHP myadmin 1, and up here we should have PHP myadmin. Maybe not. I can't. This is hard to read. I'm used to much smaller. Oh, looks like I might have killed a bunch. I think it's because I had most of the ports were mapped to the same ones. I only changed Nginx and MariaDB. So I'll have to look into that. Any other final questions before we get 3 minutes? Okay, who wants the last t-shirt? Okay.